I've started to think about this question, or rather, I began to ponder the idea of the notion freedom and what it means to be free and to have freedom. And I've thought about this in many ways. And it started to become this sort of inextricable problem for me, because I just couldn't understand what it really means to have freedom and what it means to be free. As I always do, which always seems to be the case, for me at least, when I need an answer, I went to nature. I walked through the forest, and I simply observed what was going on. And it was in the forest where I came upon a stream running through a little valley in between a hill on one side and a hill on the other side. Essentially, it was what you might call a crevasse in between two hills, which just so happened to be part of the same landscape. So therefore, that would mean that they are not separate hills, but one hill. And you see, this is when it started to make sense to me. You see, when I was observing this stream and looking at the way it was flowing and how its path didn't seem to be predetermined, but rather flowing with the landscape in which it was ensconced. Meaning that water, being free, or representing freedom in this analogy, takes whatever path needs to be taken. It does not hold on to anything or have any preferences whatsoever as to where it flows. It just flows where it is supposed to and where it can. See, water does not assert its will onto nature. It simply flows into it and with it. It becomes one with it, with its environment around it. And as I previously stated about these two hills being one in the same landscape, this is where the idea of freedom seemed to start to make sense to me. You see, we can only have an idea, freedom, if we have an idea, not freedom. You see, in order to feel free, we have to have the idea of being constrained to a localized area. And there's plenty of people who believe that we are not free, that we are merely objects, predetermined rather, by our own instinctual propensities, which are said to be merely biological. But you see, I think this is only because we have the idea of something other than us. And you see, in all things, the tension of opposites seems to prevail. In the stream, which was positioned in this local forest of mine, see, underneath the flowing water was a platform, or rather, a base foundation, which was, I think, probably limestone or some sort of rock. And you see, what this said to me was that solidity with the rock implies that very notion of solidity, and the opposite would be the water or the non-localized environment. You see, uncertainty implies certainty, and vice versa. Just as the hill on the right side implies the hill on the left side. But you see, they're all one and the same thing. The separateness is merely an illusion. This is what you might call the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. As Alfred North Whitehead said, in the inescapable flux, there is something that abides. In the overwhelming permanence, there is an element that escapes into flux. Permanence can be snatched out of the flux, and the passing moment can find its adequate intensity only by its submission to permanence. You see, there's an element of concreteness in everything, and there is also an element of fluctuation in everything. You see, they go together. You cannot have the idea certainty without the idea uncertainty. This is what you might call a contradiction. And if we think about it logically, we can say that it is a contradiction. But you see, this is merely an axiom of language. Language is contradictory. Language is filled with contradictions. And I don't think that this is something that we can escape with language. Because you see, we can never actually describe nature adequately with language. Although, that is not to say that language is not conducive or advantageous for our understanding of the universe, or of reality, or of day-to-day life. You see, language serves a function, but we need to recognize that nature is nothing but ambiguity. It is not localized, and it is uncertain, even if we think about this quantum mechanically. But you see, when you get out and observe nature, it seems to tell you things. Nature is the best teacher. And I was thinking about freedom and what this idea of freedom is, and what does it mean to have freedom. But you see, this is a profound question, and a perplexing one. What is freedom? Is the water free? Is the rock confined to its localized environment? Are the hills merely one and the same, or are they opposites? You see, these are just categories. And I'm not quite sure if language does an adequate job at explaining what is going on. You see, there's a lot going on. Nothing can do but do. You see? Everything is going on. And we can describe anything in a way that we see fit, as long as it serves a function. Because as we said, language is merely a thing which serves a function for us, for our understanding of what we are trying to observe. And this is essentially what science is. Observations. But you see, science, just as language is subjective, is also this, subjective and anthropomorphic. So what is freedom? What does it mean to be free? Well, I guess my consensus is that I don't know. But it will not stop me from thinking about it, from talking about it, from trying to elaborate on the subject. I will continuously do so, because you see, this is the essence of philosophy. This is why we philosophize. Because as human beings possessed with what you might call consciousness, we for some reason have this inherent desire to penetrate the world so that we may understand it, to break it down into smaller pieces. But you see, I think what we're doing when we are breaking the world down into smaller pieces, and you see, I'm also somebody who does this, and you could call this an inadequacy of mine, and I'm also criticizing myself. But you see, what I think we are doing when we minimize the world down into smaller and smaller bits, what we are doing is reducing it into something which it is not. Because you see, it is a whole organism. The universe is all one thing. It has all of these separate parts and has a multitude of different and various expressions. And you can see this in a forest. But you see, the forest is one whole organism. It does not function separately. There are all sorts of different types of trees and flowers and plants, protozoa, animals. But you see, they all go together. And underneath this forest floor is an even bigger and more profound environment. There are all sorts of microorganisms and living creatures. The roots of trees spread out. There are fungal mycorrhizal networks which connect all of these roots, and they all share nutrients and communicate with each other. You see, the forest is a massive communication network. You could even say that it is akin to a brain. It has connections similar to how the brain has connections, how we have a nervous system. You see, you could say that the forest also has a nervous system, and you could say that these are its roots. And these roots are what help the forest learn and adapt. Because you see, there is a tremendous amount of adaptability within a forest, just as there is a tremendous amount of adaptability within your brain. We could refer to this as neuroplasticity, which is something the brain does, and this is how it learns. And you see, a tree is also adaptive. It must know when to shed its leaves if it is a deciduous tree. It must know when to start photosynthesizing again so that it may grow. You see, and the tree knows this inherently. It has a sort of clock, you could say. Or you could say that it learns. That it is aware of its environment. That it is intelligent. And I think that it is intelligent. Some people might say that nature is stupid or mute, as the existentialists would say. But you see, this is a myopic presumption. How could a tree be stupid? You see, it does all of these things, and it lives a very long life, and it learns as it goes when to shed its leaves, when to grow them back. It has to fight certain diseases and be aware of its environment. The forest and the tree are a very intelligent organism, and they're all one organism, just as the universe is one whole organism. You see, the forest is just as much the universe as the universe, and so are you. We are all one thing. So, what is freedom? You might ask. Well, I think that is a stupid question. And maybe all questions are stupid. because they do not have an answer. We might be able to answer them and say that we have spoken truth. But that brings up the question, what is truth? Truth is anthropomorphic. It is something that we believe. It serves a function for us. But how do we speak truth? Truth, I believe, at least in my estimation, is something that we have created. Truth is an idea, just as freedom is an idea. We can only have ideas, but this should not stop us from thinking. But what we should also realize is that opposite, or rather, something which implies other, means that it is also you. Solid implies not solid. Cold implies hot. See, we can even think about this alchemically. And the alchemists thought about the opposites in their day-to-day life, and this was something that was extremely important to them. Because you see, everything opposes everything. You cannot have softness without hardness. You cannot have coldness without hotness. You cannot have the idea me without the idea other. As William James said, I is merely a noun of position. What we are doing when we call ourselves I is confining ourselves to a localized environment. And we are failing to recognize that we are in fact part of the whole thing. We are differentiating ourselves from the environment. We are saying that we are separate from it and not a part of it. The whole thing, that is. You see, the universe is one function. It is one whole thing, although it may take on a multiplicity of different expressions. This differentiation and this separateness is, as I have previously stated, merely illusory. We have fooled ourselves. And this is the game. And you see, I guess this brings up the idea again, or rather the realization that you are, in fact, God